Welcome. You're listening to How I Did That, a storytelling podcast. Let's jump into today's episode.
So today's guest is John Wolff, founder and CEO of two companies, Kaimon International, a consulting company, and Urban Electronic Games, his video game studio. John comes on today to share his journey of founding these companies, from holding the first video game conference in Detroit, living and working in Japan, what video game design entails, giving his first TED Talk, how he helped to bridge the gaps in international business relations, and much more. You can check out all of his links in the podcast description.
Hey, Neha.
Hey, John. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Can you start off by introducing yourself?
Yes, my name is John Wolff. I'm a native of Detroit, and I currently run a video game studio called Kaimon International. I first started making games through a company called Urban Electronics, and our company currently works on augmented reality, video games, and blockchain.
Nice. So, John, bring us back to when you were coming out of high school, going into college. What's your background in?
Yeah, so I started a video game studio when I was 16 years old, and that's the one I just mentioned called Urban Electronic Games. And I held the first ever video game conference in Detroit over at Wayne State. And from around that time, I just always had a huge interest in video games. And so my mom and my dad just pushed me, instead of playing them all the time, to try making them. And so I had this organization, and I tried to begin to learn about how to make games when I was in high school. Then when I moved into college, I studied international relations in Japanese. But then outside of Boston University, that's where I went to school, so I was over in Boston, I still explored the video game industry. Because video game development in Boston actually happens to be huge. It's really, really cool how great it is. So I was going to various places over at MIT, and they had the Microsoft Nerd Center, which is the New England Research and Development Center that was over in Cambridge. And so I would go to a lot of these places to learn more about the game industry. And they had a lot of independent game events. So a lot of people will call themselves indie game developers, which means they just don't work at a company, they make games for themselves. And so the indie game scene in Boston was great, and allowed a person like myself to begin to learn a lot about the game industry on a different level. And then I can kind of go on more from there if you'd like, but that's kind of how I went from, at least from high school to college in terms of games. And then from after college to Japan, and now where I am now is a huge, different focus and pivot, but I can go there whenever you'd like me to.
First, I wanted to ask, you started, it's Urban Electronic Games, right?
Yeah. That's the name that I like, that I develop video games through. Yes, there's no doubt about that.
And you started that when you were, 16?
Yeah. I don't know if you want to add this in, but it's a little silly, but it's also a little bit embarrassing. The first game I ever made was actually to ask my girlfriend at the time to prom.
It's awesome.
Yeah, and so I was really young when I started to make games. I was influenced by a huge mogul when it comes to video games called Hideo Kojima. He made Metal Gear Solid, which will probably go down as one of the greatest games in history. And I was reserving a copy for the latest game at the time, Metal Gear Solid 3. I got a free game magazine that's called Game Informer, and on the cover it said, "Make your own video games." And I was like, what? And then everything just changed from that. And then when I was in high school, I just began to really research how to make video games.
So when you started that research, not you had the background in that you played a lot of video games, but when you started that research on trying to make your own, how did you even go about that? That's such a vast field.
Yeah, back then there was nothing. It was so hard to find out things. I tried to find, I had a computer, had the internet, so I tried to look up books and things like that. Unfortunately, the name of the book that I actually was able to find, I know it was by Charles River Media, which is the publishing company. But I found a really good book about how to start a video game studio, another one about how to make a video game. And that was at my local library. So I went to my local library and began just to kind of read up about it. Then I started looking for organizations, and I found what's called the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, which is really huge. And there's a chapter usually in every single state and really in every single country. And I joined their group because I wanted to see how they could help me find the resources and the knowledge base to be able to tap to learn about video games. And so I joined the IGDA. They're kind of like, "You're really young to join, so I'm not really sure there's much for you to do." And I said, "Well, if you don't mind just processing my payment, I'll see what I can do." And then I looked at the IGDA. I found that University of Michigan had a little bit of a group. So I went over to an IGDA meetup that was over in University of Michigan. I met some local game developers. A lot of them were students over at University of Michigan. One company that does exist in Michigan is called Stardock. And I think they've been around since maybe the mid 90s. So they're like a legendary well-known game studio that exists in Michigan. And so I began to learn a lot from these people. What if I wanted to go into games, what should I do? What should I study? And that kind of gave me a framework to really get me in the mode of starting a studio, but also become kind of like a producer, which is what I am now.
When you say video game studio, I'm not exactly sure on the terminology. What does that mean?
It means that startups, right? They're businesses, and really, it's the startup and video game studio are the same thing, but your business is that of making games, and usually you try to have more than one. Now, when you make a video game, you need to have multiple components, right? You need to have graphics, you need to have programming, you need to have music. You need to have what I would say is not a project manager, but you'd have to be a producer. They're pretty much interchangeable, I would say, but a producer is more in the entertainment field. So your studio is like that silo and that group of all working on a specific project. Now, if you have a great studio and you can manage all this, then you're going to have multiple silos and multiple projects going on at once. And then that is what it means to be a game studio. And then you go from the process of concept to post-production. So you go to concept, pre-production, production, then post-production. Once you get to post-production, it's out there in the market. People are playing it and et cetera, et cetera.
When you said that you were developing like a game studio you were doing it on your own, right? At the time.
Yeah. So when I started Urban Electronics, it was a nonprofit. But that's because I didn't really know of any other business entities at the time and didn't really know how I could handle it. So I learned, again, through these books that if you want to have a video game studio, these are the components that you need to have. Okay. So I began asking friends in my high school, like in my local community, are you guys interested in making video games? Some of them were, some of them weren't. And I began to kind of make this little, group based off of that. And we met over at Lawrence Tech, which again, it's crazy how I've come full circle because now I get interns from Lawrence Tech. To meet up to just talk about video games. It was just a group of all of us kind of hanging out and understanding what video games are, playing them, and then thinking about how we go about developing it. So that was when I would say I was developing my video game studio, even though, again, it was kind of like, we're just finding our way. Simultaneously, it was like, what things can we do for the community? So I decided to put together a video game conference, which was called The Other Side of the Screen, which I held when I was a senior in high school over at Wayne State. And that featured, again, specific speakers from each one of those segments, from music, from computer programming, from graphics, and design. And I had those speakers come over at Wayne State. We rented out the auditorium. I had a couple of sponsors from Gameloft, which was a mobile game studio that is a subset of Ubisoft, if you happen to have heard that name before. But they sponsored us because I just happened to been able to talk to a few people, and they were like, hey, we love this. Go ahead and do it. And so while I was finding my way in terms of acting as a business, I also kind of did some philanthropic work and nonprofit work to also just do some advocacy for game development. And that was kind of like my high school experience. And then when I got into college, it was like, all right, now let me try to act as a studio and actually develop a title. That's kind of what happened.
Wow. You were able to just network and get people from all these different areas of gaming expertise and get them to come to your talk or come to your event?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's actually funny when you say it like that, because now that I think about it, that's probably where all my network abilities have come from, because now I, network with people in Finland and Japan and like all these other places. But I was hustling, my parents supported my dream, I'm lucky to have some awesome parents, and they took me to a lot of these events, and they were random events, one was even in Chicago, which I found again in one of the magazines that I got from the IGDA. And I was like, hey, these people from Electronic Arts are going to be speaking over in Chicago, and I really want to go. And my dad was like, hey, all right, let's make a road trip out of it. And we went, and I went and learned more about the game industry from there. I was excited. I was a kid at a candy store, so these people liked my energy. I kept in contact with them. So I was doing networking before I knew exactly what networking was. Yeah. So I went to all these little events that I could find, anything that I could, and talk to people, and just kept that. And then when I was doing this event, I just contacted them again. They're all like, yeah, we want to be able to help you out. We want to talk about it. And they were happy to come and speak at this event that we had. I forgot exactly how much money we raised. I think we had at least about 200 people that attended.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really nice. It was really fun.
Nice. What year was this event held in?
It was in 2008, and I think it was October, because it was on my birthday. So it was October 21st, 2008 for sure. It was around that time of when we held the conference. I think I still have some flyers around here, but It's impossible to find on the internet. We used to have it on my old site, but I don't know if it's in the archives or somewhere in Wayne State, but it happened. It happened.
Wow, that's really cool. You really used all of the resources you had at that time, to kind of get where you wanted to go and develop your interests further. When you started university then, I'm curious as to why did you not pursue something in like software development? Because you said you studied international relations, right?
I started off as an engineer. I started off as an engineer, and what I realized is that, there are some personality types, I believe, that fall better into certain fields than others. And I'm just not much of a programmer. Like a language, you need to be able to read and write. And I'm much better at reading it and then communicating by being able to read someone's code and communicate to them than me writing it myself. If someone can do it faster than you, then it's better for you to team up with that person. You should hire people that are smarter than you, that's what they say. So I was able to kind of quickly understand that, like, I was hitting a lot of pain points when it came to this, to the point where it shouldn't be my major. And I've always been a person who tries to chart my own path. So I kind of just buckled down and said, I can still be able to make games without this being specifically what it is that I want to do. And instead I decided to pivot over to, something I've always been interested in, which is more cultural and worldviews. And so that's where I began to learn a little about Japanese and international relations. But again, I was very hungry to make video games. So I found myself learning more about the business and the framework for development more than the development itself. Now, that actually did come to hurt and help for some of the initial projects I worked on. But that's kind of why I decided to switch majors and focus on games kind of more outside of school or in tangent to or in parallel to me being in college.
I see. That's really interesting, because the first thing I would think of when you said you worked in video games, for some reason, I automatically assumed you might have a background in computer science.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people would assume that, but that's very cool, because you're not looking at the actual game development itself. You're not looking at the actual programming or anything itself, which you'd mentioned that it hurt and it helped you. And I'm wondering, without having that knowledge, did it ever come to the point where, like, you're working on a project and you're like, I don't understand the fundamentals of how this game is actually coded. So, you felt like you were lacking in knowledge. Did that ever happen?
Oh yeah. So when I was in college, I started making my first official title. Sweet game. It was so cool. Oh my gosh. Can't tell you how awesome this game was. I hope one day to get back to it. And I can speak more about it and how it led to some interesting things. But the development itself, what I was doing was that I wasn't being a proper leader. I wasn't being a proper product manager. I thought that, I could just dictate, or I could just tell someone, hey, this is what I want. And that's just not the way you go about it. I mean, I've heard now of so many people who run in similar situations like this, programmers who are like, man, I'm hired to do this job, but this person doesn't know what it is, what they want. And that was kind of like me. I was like, I didn't understand. We were all doing this together, but you have to get your hands dirty. And that was a huge problem, is that I wasn't either willing, or like, I thought that I did not need to get my hands dirty. I thought that if I just had a programmer, that it would be okay. And I do believe that that was a big reason why the first game that I wanted to develop failed, because I was biting off more than I could chew in terms of what the game was supposed to be, but also really being able to just be with my team and look at lines of code and say, like, no, this doesn't work. Or, when you're using a video game, use something called a game engine. And not being able to say, how does this code attach to this object? How does this object move from left and right? Okay, the code itself doesn't actually move from left and right. There's something in here that's wrong. I did not take an active part in that. And I'm really upset at myself that happened. But I learned from that I have to be right there in the trenches with the people that you're working with. And that has changed so much about how I went producing my second game and a third game that I did in this fourth one right now. So that was a huge learning experience. And it required me to begin to at least understand code to a better degree where I'm able to read it. Again, I don't have to be able to write it, but I have to be able to check someone's work and work with the team.
how did you overcome that? Like you mentioned, was it just consistently working with people who were programmers who had knowledge on the topic, and you just kind of learned how to read and understand code from there?
Yeah, like when they submitted their code, I would just ask them, they became my teachers. I would ask them, show me what these, I mean, being able to read basic functions I can do, of being able to see exactly, if and else statements and things of that nature and variables and how they work.
And
Like I get, I'm sorry.
Like you're able to look at it and tell how it flows and what's
Yes.
going on, basically. Okay.
Precisely. So then it's the nuts and bolts of then abstracting it and then saying, all right, we have, I can take a Wormzilla, for example. We have this radioactive mutated worm that's supposed to be eating all the radioactive waste that exists in a world that is prolific with radioactive waste. And okay, so we have this character, he needs to be able to move left and right. So show me where the control schemes are, because we have 3 control schemes. One where you use the accelerometer on your phone, another one where you use your finger to go left and right, and then the other one where you tap the screen. So let's break down these 3 control schemes. First, tell me where do they exist in the code? Okay, now let me see exactly how you are setting the accelerometer to work with certain angles of when someone tilts their hand. Explain that to me. So it was really me just asking them all the time to do this. And through working with the team and making a game, I became a lot more proficient in being able to read someone's code, but code in general. And then also APIs, like when you want to do data analytics, when you want to throw things like that so you can track on, your daily active users and all of that are coming from, a third party. And I became really good at being able to integrate third-party APIs into our game. And that allowed me to then, start kind of programming things myself. Because I was like, my team is busy. I need to figure out how to do this. So then I'll do APIs. I'll do data analytics. I will insert those things into this game and learn for them and for myself. So it was born out of necessity, but also utilizing my team to help me learn as well.
What does API stand for?
Application Programming Interface.
I was just curious, like what exactly did the APIs do that you were putting them into your game? What exactly were you getting from that?
Yeah, so there's a bunch. One that's easy to understand is ad APIs. So if you want to monetize your game, you're going to have in-app purchases, or maybe you might, and these are the classic things because things are different now. But classic APIs are, you want to make a game, so you decide to put ads into your game. So then you're going to have an API from an ad company, and you're going to leverage how to integrate that into your code so that then you can make calls to their servers to ask for an ad, which is called request, and then they give you back an ad and you display that on the screen, which is called an impression. So it's using their code base and their structure and taking that and integrating into my game. So that's one API. Another one is something called Unity Analytics. The game engine I use is called Unity. And so we use Unity Analytics to be able to track to see how long someone's playing our game. Did they buy an item? Did they clear this level? And in order to get that in there, you have to put in their API, because they have a whole library of like, okay, if you want to check these things, then put these lines of code into your game. And so then I would put those lines of code into the appropriate areas so that when someone does something in the game, it hits and it gets sent over there. And then I can look at the information, aggregate it, look at graphs and see, okay, 5 people played our game today. Oh, of these 5 people, only 4 made it past, or 4 made it past level 3. And that is how you begin to apply external APIs into your game. It's on a need basis, but those are ones that were necessary for us, and usually for game developers, they need to put in so they can scale and get KPIs, key performance indicators.
When you talk about video games, like the types of video games that are out there, there are so many.
Oh my God.
And I'm just wondering, like, what niche were you in?
So I got into video games because I love to tell stories. I am interested in video games for this philosophical, quintessential, metaphysical reason. Like, people, again, look at me, they're like, oh, you must be a programmer and you must play video games all the time. Both are not true. I'm a very unconventional person. But I absolutely love the ability to tell stories. So when I first started making games, the first genre that I wanted to make was called CYOA, Create Your Own Adventure. Because that is me starting small. I decided to do mobile games because 3D and PlayStation and Xbox, they all seem like they're over my head. So I decided to start small with mobile and then grow from there. So how do you tell a story on a mobile device? Well, then you make a create your own adventure game, which is usually very static in terms of images. You have 2D images. Think of a comic book, and you pretty much are traversing. A scary character comes into the room. Do you decide to go left? Do you decide to go right? And so that's how the game works. And you hit left and you go to another screen. So that's one genre that I started to niche myself into. But then again, since my first game that I was making failed, I was like, I need to think simpler. I need to make mechanics that are easier to make and get out there. So I started to do hyper casual or casual. Now it's neither is hyper casual, but casual. Basically games with simple mechanics that can be picked up and understood easily, that people can play while they're on the way to work, while they're on the way, or they're commuting to their job, before they go, while they're watching TV, before they go to bed. Those are the type of games I decided to specialize on because it would be quicker to make and you can monetize them easier. Because again, I'm thinking as a business person, as much as I want to be a game developer, you have to also think of how you're going to run a business. And so I decided to pivot over to that. And even now that I'm making augmented reality games, it's an augmented reality pet simulator, which has a lot of cool stuff going on, but it's still a bite-sized game. You can go out into augmented reality, you can pet your pig, and then you can come back in. That's all you have to do. It's passive. There are tons of genres, but I'm still in a casual genre. And in the future, if I'm able to have a studio that has multiple projects, I would love to go back to CYOA so I could tell more stories.
Oh, nice. So are the games that you worked on in the past the ones that you've been able to finish, are they released?
So one of them is released, and two of them are available. One of them is released in Japan. Mm-hmm. The first actual official title ever released was I actually first released in Japan in Tokyo. And then I was taking all of the data that I got back from it to tweak it to make it better. And I have yet to release it over in the US. This is a concept called soft launching, in which you release your product in a different market so you can get data on it to see how it works. And so because I knew Japanese, because I knew the Japanese industry in it, and I had been there, I went and released my first game there. So it is available only over in Japan. Is the first official title that I have, but I mean I can still give these games to anyone anytime. It's open beta, so like if I gave you the link, you could play it right now. So and it also has ads in it, so I'm technically getting ad revenue when people are seeing the ads. So they're done and they're out there, but I haven't officially launched at least Wormzilla over in the American market. Mm-hmm. Tontachi, again, which is the augmented reality pet simulator, we worked on it for this year. We have now reached pre-alpha. That is also something that's open so people can play. And then a game that I made at a game jam, which is a really cool concept in which you have 24 hours to make a game. It's called 14B. That one also is something that I'm going to be putting out actually next week, because I was like, we made this game so long ago. It's so awesome. It's so done. So let's just go ahead and give it to people. Okay. So I've worked for video game studios, but my own personal titles are available to play, but only one is officially out in the market.
Nice. So those are all the games that you just mentioned. Those are the games that you have worked on and those are completed.
Yeah,
like in completion or like in progress or completed.
Yeah, other than Tontachi, the other ones, they all loop. All games, like there's a beginning and end to all these games. And again, Tontachi is their latest project. So the other games I mentioned, yes, they are done. Now, how easily accessible they are is a different thing. And that's because I'm still organizing certain things, and game developers tend to be very hold their games close to their chest. But like, if you want to play them, or if you want to make them available, or if you would like to be able to share them, I can easily give those links for people to access the game, because they are available to play. But you have to just have the link. That's it, as opposed to you searching it on the App Store.
Okay, actually, if it's okay, I could put the links in the podcast description when I publish it, and people can go and play it if they want.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely give them to you. I mean, these games are cool. Like they've been worked on for a long time, and they're very quality. But it's always interesting because it's always about how can you monetize your games. And the two games that are completed are their projects, and anyone can play them, but they're not going to be my money makers. But they showed that I've gone from like rookie to veteran, and also I've learned how to make games more quickly, efficiently, so that I can maximize on profits for later games. And that that happens. Sometimes you have to release multiple projects before you hit your first one. And I was told that when I was coming up in the game industry. It was like, your first game might not be your one-hit wonder, but you have to just keep on releasing titles. And so that's what I'm doing.
I'm curious, how many people do you usually work with when you make a game?
So when I was in college, again, I was like, yo, I'm going to go big here. And I was making two games at the same time. One was called Hostile Development, which is a create your own adventure. And you're put into a bank robbery. I was exploring something called action theory, which is, what do you do when you have no prior knowledge of what to do? And so someone holds a gun to your head. What do you do? Do you obey them? Do you try to thwart them? Do you team up with them? I'd like to talk more about that because there's a lot of cool things going on. But on that team, there There was there was two artists, one programmer, one musician, four, and then there was like some cycling members. So then in the end, I try to keep the silo, like the games for, one core team member for each game. I was also making another game, which was using a Fitbit to make an avatar that matched with your exercise. So if you want to do better in this game, you have to run in real life. So I was trying, again, as a 20-year-old, to do 2 video games, total of 8 people, 4 and 4, on a budget of $5,000, which is like unheard of. And that's why both of those games failed, because like no one's gonna, where's the money for these people? Mm-hmm. And I thought I could handle it, but I had no idea what I was doing. I definitely didn't have enough money, and so those games fell apart. So usually 4 people is what I try to have right now in the game. But even after that failure, that flame out, I began to make another game, Wormzilla, and then it was just 2 people, just a graphic artist and a programmer and myself. So that's 3 in total. For the games I make right now, it's the same thing. It's 3 people, a graphic artist, a programmer, and myself. And then now, since our company is doing well, I have to begin to expand once more. I'm expanding my team now, but I'm more comfortable with expanding my team because I have learned so much from the mistakes I had from those 2 games in the past. And so now I feel comfortable with being able to take on more individuals, maybe having 2 programmers, still probably only 1 graphic artist, and bring on a musician. So I'm okay. But your core team is probably going to be about 4 people. One that's gonna lead each segment. Again, music, programming, graphics. You will probably need a project manager, and then maybe you'll have a game designer, a person who actually comes up with the whole world of the game. So we'll say 5 people need to be in a game to really make it work well.
Interesting. So that kind of segues into what I was going to ask you is, during your time in university, what sorts of things did you work on? Because you weren't taking computer science courses, right? You were studying international relations. And was that in Japanese, or were you taking Japanese classes?
No, they were Japanese courses. And then I worked in industry. I worked in mobile advertising. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to Japan. Now, when I moved to Japan, I was in a collegiate course for about 1.5 years. And that was 100% every single day in Japanese. Mm-hmm. And I took economics and microeconomics in Japanese, biology in Japanese, and also like some other, like history class. And I give presentations. I have a research paper that talks about how cultural values are reflected in video games. And that entire research paper, it was like 4 or 5 pages, is written in Japanese. So that was 100% every single day in Japanese. And it was one of the hardest things I had done in my life, because it was from morning to sunset, sunrise to sunset, Japanese all the time. Now, when I was in college, that was after college. So, but while I was in college, I was hanging out at Boston University, just taking Japanese classes, and I was making video games outside of school. I got really interested in, again, create your own adventure, but I also got really interested in psychology. Because again, the beauty of video games is that you're able to explore this virtual realm. And what's really crazy about games is that what happens when you kind of break fourth wall, or when digital aspects begin to bleed into reality. I do believe that can happen, and I have tangible evidence why. But so again, like I was saying with the game that was called Hostile Development, the whole point of the game was to evaluate how you act when you're in a bank robbery. If you are acting brave in a video game that has a hero or something like that, are you then more inclined, or do you might think about acting more brave in real life? What is it about your character in the digital realm that might be similar or completely different than your actual personality? What is that juxtaposition? Do they bleed over? And that was so fascinating, because again, that's what games do. Like games, you act differently sometimes in a digital realm. So I went to a lot of professors to kind of ask about, what theory or what can I do? How can I kind of bring this out in the game? And I was trying to, again, blend all of these amazing abstract philosophical issues into a game which I had no idea how to make. But it was really fun to do that outside of school or outside of college. And actually, certain departments in college actually gave me grant funding to actually pursue this project. I did a UROP, an undergraduate research opportunity. I actually think I have like the poster right here. It was all about exploring digital psychology versus like the actual human behavior or whatever, something like that. And so that's kind of like how I was still involved with the university, but outside of school and use that to make games and learn about games. I actually gave a TED talk. I actually have it. There's a TEDx BU talk. You can search it. It'll be up there, and it talks about, again, everything I'm saying. And what's so crazy, actually, because I was actually watching the video just the other day, was what's so crazy about this is that I'm find myself that I'm still doing the same thing, but now jumping a little bit of ahead is that now that I'm using blockchain, what I'm doing is that I'm literally taking digital currency and being able to create actual fiat currency from it. So it's, again, taking something from the digital realm and bring it into the realm of the concrete. And it's really cool to see that even back then, roughly 10 years ago when I gave this speech, it's still relevant to what I'm doing today. So
Yeah,
that was basically my collegiate experience in terms of video games.
That you mentioned digital psychology, because that's not really a field that I'd ever thought about. When you think of psychology and social sciences, you don't really connect it with technology. It's kind of like separate things. Was there anything we missed during your college experience? Any major things you worked on that you wanted to talk about?
That I want to talk about. I mean, the highlights again was the fact that I was able to do this TEDx talk, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. Then the Boston University, their medical campus, again, they contacted me and they're like, hey, you make games. Can you help us make this? Or can you help us just, do something? And I was like, okay. And that's why I had this side project of using Fitbits to augment game characters. And that was also cool. And I still think I haven't seen any games that did that, but that was a really cool opportunity. But again, I couldn't capitalize on it because I didn't know what I was doing. That's really probably the long and short of my collegiate experience when it comes to video games and what I was doing. I was supposed to go to Japan, but I couldn't. Nuclear reactor, tsunami, earthquake happened. So I got booted from supposed to being in Tokyo to being randomly in Dartmouth. But that's just a side story.
Was that after graduation or during college?
That was during. I was going to travel. I was going to go abroad my junior year.
Oh.
And I had taken these Japanese courses, and I was all set to. I was accepted to go into Keio, which is a really prestigious university in the middle of Tokyo. I had paid my tuition. I had registered for my classes. I had my plane ticket. Was literally about to get on the plane. Well, not actually, but it was like roughly about a week before. And the 2011 tsunami, earthquake, and nuclear reactor explosion all happened then. And every single day after that, they're like, well, we still want you to come. Every day, like, well, we're not sure. And then, on the national travel advisory, it says, all non-essential U.S. personnel, please stay out of Japan. And I was like, all right, my program's done. So I was supposed to go to Japan then, and unfortunately it didn't happen. And I wouldn't get back to Japan until another 5-6 years after that. And that's when I moved over to go to this school.
How long was that program supposed to be for, the first time you were going to go?
Oh, that was only supposed to be, like a semester or something.
Oh,
maybe like 3 months or whatever. And who knows what could have happened if I was over there, but this just wasn't in the cards at the time. Instead, that's when I began to focus more on, the real metaphysics behind games. And then I graduated and I kind of then did some stuff after that. But yeah, that's kind of everything that happened in college.
I'm just curious, why do you think Boston has such a big video game industry?
The colleges.
Oh, okay.
The think tanks are all come up from the colleges that are there, MIT, Harvard, Northeastern University. There's a lot of good universities that that game companies are able to pull their talent from. Mm-hmm. Also, I think this was back then. I remember hearing the state of the game industry was the biggest cities for game development production. The first was California. The second was New York. The third was Boston, and the fourth was Texas or something. That was back then. But yeah, I would just say because there's a lot of sharp minds that are coming out of universities, and they're able to then pull those into smaller studios.
So then, after you graduated, you didn't get to go to Japan, right, during school. But then after you graduated, and you said that you had worked for a company for a bit?
Yeah, I worked for three, maybe even 4 years in mobile advertising, which was really crazy. They were like, hey, man, you know some things about mobile games, and we think you would do well here. And, I was looking for a job out of college, and it paid pretty well. I mean, I started off as an intern, in the mailroom, and this just goes to show again about hustling, but I was an intern doing off tasks, and continued to go around that company, ask everyone about everything, and they're like, hey, this guy seems like he could do some stuff. And long story short, I ended up becoming a data scientist at this company. But in the middle of all that, they're doing mobile advertising, so they're putting their ads on games, like I said before about APIs. And this is what's crazy is that this is me. I can say this because I'm a game developer. is that game developers, we're kind of purists. Like we want to be able to have this beautiful world, and we're not business people. We're not thinking about how to make money. So you have a lot of beautiful games that don't do well or have a hard time monetizing. When I was working at this mobile advertising company, I saw a lot of, subjectively speaking, bad video games that were making so much money from ads. Because they didn't care about that whole like try to be purist aspect. They're like, I'm going to make some quick money by putting these ads up in your face when you can play this really bite-sized game that is going to be addicting, but isn't really going to have much depth. Mm-hmm. And I went to the Boston independent game community and I was like, how do you guys feel about ads? And they'd be like, we hate them, they're stupid. And I was like, I feel you guys, but like I'm over here and I'm seeing how much money they're making a week, a month, and I have to give this to them. I have to do analytics and say, hey, you guys made $1,000 this week. Give us more traffic, show more of us, let us give you more users. And it was amazing for me, again, being a person who was working on ideal video games and being in this other side where it was like, make the money of being in this position at this company. And it was really fun to be there it was grueling because my soul hurt, but it was an amazing learning experience, which got me to begin to think more like a business. It was like, I am a game designer. I do want to be able to tell stories, but I have to think about how I'm going to monetize this. And that really shifted my focus. So it was really good for that. They also ended up having a Japanese partner. And this is actually how I began to then focus more in Japan. They ended up having a Japanese partner. And I got a chance to, when I saw that, I was like, yo, let me work with them. I can speak Japanese and I want to be able to do this. And they're like, this partnership is so in the trash. It's not going well. And I was like, why? And I come to find out that really no one in their company could speak Japanese.
And you're like, aha.
Which is bizarre, right? It was bizarre. I was like, how can you attempt to do business when you can't speak the native tongue? But here's what's so crazy, Neha, is like that happens in a lot of businesses. What I learned is this huge disconnect of trying to bridge cultural differences and not even language barriers when you're trying to describe technology to somebody or a product that's not, when you have to localize. Localization is so hard, and any language probably, but in this case, when it comes to Japanese, there's so many more things that I learned that are involved with it. And our company just didn't have that type of know-how or understanding. Mm-hmm. And eventually, unfortunately, the partnership went away because it just wasn't progressing. And I was able to, I was like, this is fascinating to me. The fact that, I'm so close to being involved with this Japanese company, but the infrastructure isn't there. And why is that? And I wanted to understand that. And that kicked up my interest in Japanese again, because again, I was focusing on video games, data science, but I was like, no, something about this really spoke to me. And I had an amazing advisor at the company, or she was my boss at the time, of saying, hey, if you want to do this, you have to become fluent. I was not fluent in Japanese. Mm-hmm. I could speak it, but like I wasn't fluent. I hadn't gone to study abroad. I didn't have a lot of Japanese friends. So, I could do some things, but I wasn't able to really get into the business sense. And that stuck with me. So I learned more about video games. I did data science, but I had this interest in Japanese. So I began to restudy Japanese and decided to apply to this intensive language program. After doing research, I was like, how can I get to Japan? What should I do? What can I do? And I searched so many programs, and I found this program that was like, I think the Ministry of Education, like in Japan, has instilled this program in every single university. And so I decided to go ahead and apply. But that was really it. I mean, like I worked in mobile advertising. It was really cool. It was my first corporate job. It was that whole cool life, like if you've seen Silicon Valley, do you like that show?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a couple episodes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing show. And it was very relatable because I was working in ad tech, and that was really hot during the time. And so it had that whole Silicon Valley. But we're like, hey, we're throwing this huge party. You're like, we got all these clients, or we got this huge client. Yeah, Candy Crush, which was made by King. They were our largest client. And so again, every single day I would see how much money Candy Crush was bringing it in from the ads that they were showing in the game. And I was like, this is ridiculous.
It's like games that don't require thinking.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Like I can't knock these games. I'm like, hey, they're in the business of making money, but when it comes to the spectrum of games, this is definitely on the casual, let alone hyper casual, which doesn't require you to really have to do so many game functions. I think when I learned from the Boston Indies is like it triggers the rat brain. Like there's this psychological reward of like flashing lights and things like that attract your attention. Like, oh, okay, we're winning, yeah, let's go. And those games had a lot of that stuff in there. Temple Run was another one. Temple Run was a great one. That's what's called an endless runner, and that's actually what Roomzilla is. It's a play till you die type of game, collecting the coins, all that stuff. And they hit at the right time as well. So timing is people say it's everything. I do think it's a large factor. And so Angry Birds, Temple Run, Clash of Clans, which Clash of Clans was on the tail end of this, but all those games came into the space around 2006, 2007. Again, they were like, hey, these games don't have to be great. But I mean, they were great, and then ad revenue was like, yo, we can find a way to make money from your games if you want. And they were like, heck yeah. And that was a very booming time for mobile games to make ad revenue between 2000 and I'll say 6 to 2014, was a lot of high revenue. I mean, it still is, but like that was like the heyday, I think.
What about now, like the type of video games that would make a lot of money? Do you think it's still kind of those games where like your rat brain activates, or where do you think that's heading now in terms of the ones that would bring in a lot of revenue?
Still, because we've gone from casual to hyper casual, and like I didn't even know hyper casual was a genre. I was at a game conference in Finland in 2018, and they're like, yeah, hyper casual. I'm like, where the hell did this come from? I was like, we had casual, like everything I was working on was casual. Now we have hyper casual, and like those were and the publishers that were there were only interested in the games that were hyper casual because they knew they could monetize them. So that genre is not going to go away, because again, when you're playing on your phone, you're not looking for an in-depth experience. A lot of us, most people aren't gamers. If they're casual gamers, if anything. And so you need something that has to be a short experience for them. And unless you're in Japan, as you get older, people aren't playing games as much. And so there'll always be a market for those, I think. And you can still make ad revenue from them. But what I'm saying is that now that that's become a recipe, publishers, bigger companies are doing that. Independent game developers aren't really able to capture that because you have to make your money from impressions that are made on the game. Basically, you have to have users. Mm-hmm. The more people you have, the more you're able to, monetize, because you're monetizing your customers. The KPI, key performance indicators, ARPD out, average revenue per daily active user. If you don't have a lot of users, you're not going to get these people. And so the problem that mobile game developers, any game developers having now is that we're in a proliferated market. There's so much out there. Discovery, how do you find it? Unless you get a feature on the App Store, forget about it. Unless you go with a publisher that's going to have the connections to be able to boost you up to the App Store, forget about it. And what do publishers want? They want hyper casual. So it's a lot harder now, I feel, for independent game developers to make money from their games. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize this. And it worries me about, again, how does one make money from games? And I had to go to Japan to find out how potentially to make money from a game. And I came back, and that's why I'm kind of, revamped and reinvigorated to try this more intensely.
Mm-hmm. And so when you were looking at going to Japan, because you saw that disconnect between working with a Japanese company and like companies here. And so did you quit your job and immediately went abroad?
Yeah, while I was working, saving up money on the meantime, because I was like, I'm going to do this. And but I had to go through a whole application process, though. I had to take the Japanese language proficiency exam, the JLPT, because they required you to have passed N4. It's a graded test on N5 being the easiest, N1 being the hardest. I now hold N1, but at the time I didn't even have N4. Which was sad because I was like, I spent all this time getting this minor in Japanese. I'm taking this test. I'm not passing. Like, what? Like, this is some hard stuff. I thought I was ready. I think I barely passed N4. Then I had to do an interview. And then in the interview, like, again, I hadn't used my Japanese, and like, they're asking me just, classic or just basic conjugations. And then they're asking me like, what is it that I do? And it was like pulling teeth. It was so hard. And I was like, all right, like, I think I botched this. So I applied to 3 schools. Again, I was working at the time and I was doing this, over the weekend and stuff. And I applied to 3 schools, 1 in Tokyo, 1 in Osaka, and 1 in Kyoto. And obviously I was like, I want to be in the one in Tokyo, but they're like, no, that was Waseda. So I applied and you get the results like in April or something like that. And, I had spent all this time working, saving money. And I was like, okay, it's time for me to know if I'm going to get accepted. And I think I even got like sick. I got like sick and I was like, I got to take a day off from work. And I got like all like the responses back at once. No, I didn't. I got Kyoto and Tokyo at the same time. So I was like, all right, well, let's see if I get Tokyo. I was like, this is kind of the one I want. They're like, no, sorry. In fact, they don't even have, what they did is Japan is so crazy. They just have like a board or like a page that have all these numbers, and you just look to see if your application number showed up. It was so impersonal. So I'm like looking there. I'm like, where's number 5, 4, 6, 7, 8? I'm like, is it there? Like, no, it's not. Am I looking wrong? And I was like, no, I didn't do it. But the one I really wanted was Doshisho over in Osaka. And because my friend went there, and her and I were really good friends. And I really liked, the way that she had gone about things in her professional career. And I thought that would be a good university for me. Because again, I don't know anything about Japan. I don't really, like, where do I go? Who do I trust? And I just thought these would be 3 good schools. Mm-hmm. And I applied there. Same thing. I looked for the number. I was like, no, it's not there. I was so upset. I was like, this isn't happening. Like, oh man, like I think I'm just gonna quit my job and just go and just see what happens. And then, like I was sick, and like I got the last one. And I was like, it's already gonna be a no. I told my friend to read it, and he was like, yo, you got in. I'm like, what? Like, I got in. And like, this was the one that I had the really, really bad interview with. And that was in Osaka. And so, the next day I was like, all right, I'm going to do these preparations where I told the company, I was like, hey, I'm going to get my visa processed. I'm going to finish this application, but I'm going to be leaving by, latest August. So I'm going to be, winding down. And so I decided I quit my job and then just left. And it was totally something that I know people don't normally do that, but
you had gotten into the program, right? So you had a reason to quit your job and go. You had something waiting for you there.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess, people still think pack up. I did essentially pack up and, leave because I had no idea what I was going into. It was a one-way ticket, right? Like, but yeah, I mean, and had I not gotten in, like I said, I probably would have just gone over. Because if you are, you can be in there 3 months on a tourist visa. So I would like to just, done some walking the earth type of thing. But I wouldn't have achieved anything really. I mean,
I think it's easier said than done, just packing up and moving to a new country if you don't have a job or school or something waiting there for you.
Right. Oh, yes. And then exactly. It's like, who's harboring you?
Yeah.
First of all, your visa's on a limited basis, and everything in Japan operates off of your visa. And once your visa's up, you got to know what you're doing. And I come to find out when you're in Japan, you can get lost very easily. You can lose yourself, which is really scary. And I was in environments outside of school that I would see where it was like, hey, like hang out with us and you'll have fun. And, maybe you might make money, and like just things that were just not like, just weren't the right places for me to be. And it took a lot of introspection for me to be like, you know what, I need to just be over here and be at the school and focus in on things. I had friends and a lot of people, the program was rigorous. A lot of people dropped out. Most of the individuals in the program were Chinese, and Chinese people have a leg up because they already understand kanji. Kanji's from Japan. So these kids are coming in here. Like like one of my roommates or my floor mates was like this, like I'm 26, 27 when I come to this program. And there's like this 18, 17, 16-year-old kid who's like, oh, like you didn't even pass like N3, ha 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 ha. And I'm like, dude, I was like, oh.
Wait, what is kanji?
Kanji are other pictorial representations of words.
Oh, I see.
Like if I were to say tree, tree has a certain kanji for it. But there's 3 alphabets in Japanese. There's kanji, there's hiragana, and katakana. Hiragana is basically writing out what a singular word would be that could be represented in kanji. So again, for tree, the symbol, actually looks like a tree a little bit, right? And if you see that, you're like, okay, tree. But the word tree is ki in Japanese, and that's spelled Ki. So if you're using hiragana, you have to use a symbol or a letter that represents Ki. And most Japanese letters represent 2 letters at a time, English letters at a time, a vowel and a consonant. A, I, U, E, O, Kaki, Kuke, Ko, Tati, Tute, To, Mami, Mimo, and et cetera, et cetera. And then there's katakana, which is what they use for anything that is not native to the country. So McDonald's is Makoduna Rudo. And it kind of sounded like McDonald's in there a little bit, right? Like Burger King is Baga Kingu. And they spell that with like a really different alphabet because it's not native to the country. So you got to learn all those, and you got to learn all these kanjis. And again, like I said, the Chinese kids knew kanji, so they could already, look at a newspaper or text and get the gist. And in school, when, everything is really textbooks, oriented, then they're like, okay, we got this. And I'm over here like struggling, like so hard. And no one in the program speaks English at all. I went to office hours more for therapy sessions than I did for actually asking for help. I'd just be like, I can't do this. Like, this is so hard, so sorry. And the teachers just be like,
the teachers don't speak English either?
Yeah. They'd just be like, they're like, hi. They'd be like, okay, gobarimasu, like, give it your all. I'd be like, oh, it was really,
But your
it was really
friend
hard.
completed that program earlier, right?
What was that?
your friend had completed that program earlier? The
No,
person who had been in Japan.
No, first of all, she was Japanese, and she had come to America to study abroad, and she just went to a Japanese university that I was like, okay, like it was like it was like like a Yale of Japan or something.
Yes.
And I thought it was a really nice university. I had no reference point for this program. But I did enough research to see if like, okay, I think I can trust this program. Not a lot of people know about this. It's called BEKA, BEKKA, an intensive language program. And ever since then, if I meet anyone who's like, I want to learn Japanese, I was like, do this program, because it was worth it. First of all, it's not, America's tuition is for schools is so high. Anywhere else in the world, it's not anything. So like, it's very affordable. I think like my entire program plus like room and board cost me no more than like $7,000. Like seriously, like it wasn't bad. And the program, yes, it's hard. Not everyone's going to be able to do it. And like I said, most of the foreigners who weren't Chinese and who weren't Vietnamese dropped out. I was the only foreigners, Westerners who graduated from my program, me and one other guy, and he and I ended up being roommates. We were the only ones who graduated because everyone else was like, just couldn't take it. But going through that every single day, and for all the work they gave, we had quizzes every day. We had tests every other week. We had to write essays during the tests. So they would give us like hard topics too, like talk about the declining birth rate in Japan, and like we'd have to do like write about this like in a sakabun, which is an essay, and like write on there, and they would mark you down if you didn't use enough kanji, if you used too much hiragana, and so like, and then you'd have to take tests again, and it was brutal, but. One day I was at this like temple because I used to work at this. I had a part-time job. It's called an arubaito. And I worked as an English teacher at this like school. I would go, like before school work, and it was inside of this like really famous temple like in Japan, like in the center of Osaka. And so I would just go, walk around the temple real quick before I would go into work, just clear my head and everything like that, which is a lot of that happened in Japan. Very easy for you to clear your head when you're not around anyone and you're in nature most of the time. And I remember that there were these group of monks that were just like walking in a line. This is when I knew I become like fluent, is that I think I like asked this like one monk on the side, I asked him, do they process? I said the word process because, when you're in your line, you're processing from one place to another. Like, what kind of word is that? I said, do they process through here? And he was like, process? Like, he was like, yes, they do. And I was like, great. And I was like, wow, like, where did the word process come from out of my head in a different language? And I was like, I think at that point, I was like, I think that like I'm becoming relatively fluent in this language, when a random word out of nowhere that's the absolute appropriate word to say for what's going on is being described in Japanese, and it came out of nowhere. So again, all that rigorous stuff ended up leading to this outcome.
How long was your program?
So you can be in the program for up to 2 years. Mm-hmm. They might let you go be a little bit longer. I was there for I think about 1.5 years, or like 3 semesters. But it was pretty much 1.5 years. Japanese people do this thing called shushoku katsudo. So for when you're a junior in college, you begin to job hunting, and they have a very regimented process for it. You dye your hair black, if it's not already black. You wear a black suit, and you go to all these informational sessions at companies. Like imagine you going to Amazon or Google, and you would go for a certain informational session. Then you take an entrance exam, and you do this for like 1,000 companies, and then you get your job offer, and then you enter into the company. That's what they do. It's ridiculous, and everyone does it their junior year. It's like it's just a thing. It's like, hey, you're doing Shushoku Katsudo this year. Like, get ready for it.
So people don't have, like, if they want to get into alternate. Like, what if they don't want to go and work in a company? What if they want to do entrepreneur? Do they have other streams like that?
I'm sure they do, but like, again, most people are like, this is what I do. So this is what I do. You're going to always have the people who are going to, again, chart their own path like I am. But the majority of individuals, and in a society, which is like, Japan is a very xenophobic country. So like, they're going to do what everyone else does. Mm-hmm. And so if this is what has been, established in the years since university, that you do this thing called Shushoku Katsudo, you're most likely going to do it. And, like all of a sudden, all the RAs I had, because all the RAs were Japanese, and like I'd also go to the university because I wanted to experience the university, and I would hang out. all of a sudden, one day everyone was just walking around looking the same. Like everybody.
What's going on?
Yeah, for like a good 3 months, get out of here. Everyone was doing this. And, it was crazy because you do get, a certain score and you're weighted to go to certain industries based upon all this stuff. It's very hierarchical and very systematic.
So you can't just go into any industry you want. You get ranked based on your scoring in job interviews. And if someone were to go into technology, you would have a whole range of people. Like you were able to get a data science, basically progress to a data scientist job in the States without a background in data science. You would not be able to do that there.
Correct. You would not be. Because once you take the, I'm sorry, it's not for specific companies, but once you get into the company, you take the exam, and then the company ranks you where you can go.
I see.
And social mobility within Japanese companies is it takes a lot of time. So if you're not put in this position beforehand, it seems like it's a lot harder for you to change, so to switch it up. And that's what it was like, So and so me as a foreigner was like, I need to start looking. It was really cool because I let myself, even though I was 26, 27 at the time, I was allowing myself to act like a Japanese person. I mean, in order to learn Japanese, I had to break down every essence of who I was and build myself back up in order to actually learn the language. Japanese and English are so different, and cultural identity is embedded into language. And so I was resisting the language for so much because I was still thinking in this American mindset, still thinking in English. I mean, just to show you how crazy it is, we read from left to right. I think I said this in the pitch, but we read from left to right. They read from right to left. We read horizontally. They read vertically.
Oh, you read up and down the columns?
Yeah. Yeah. I got some books here I could show you. But so the back cover of a book is the first page of a Japanese book.
I had an anime book once. I was really confused why it was backwards.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that just shows you just how flipped your brain has to be. I think that's a great example for you to understand. And so my brain just couldn't take that. And I had to, there's this great quote by Bruce Lee. It was like, you have to unlearn all you've learned. Mm-hmm. And I had to do that. And it was so hard. And then as I built myself back up, I was like, okay. And I found myself emulating a lot of what, my counterparts were doing. So I could also, get into this flow. And so I knew that I wanted to be able to find a job in the video game industry, which is a really hard thing to do wherever you are. And so when they started to go hard on their job hunting, I also started to do my own job hunting. Now I even acted like, them, and I bought a black suit and I already got black hair. And I went to some of these informational sessions some were more catered towards foreigners. And I went to some of these and I looked at some companies, but a lot of them were like, hey, we want you to do translation work. I mean, that's what every foreigner ends up doing, that is. As either being a translator or an English teacher. And I was like, no, I came here because I wanted to work in video games. Mm-hmm. But again, bring it full circle back to all that networking I did back when I was over in high school. It really helped because I was hungry. I mean, I went to, these centers that they had for looking for job posts. And that led me from one place to one place. And I think eventually I went out one day, because again, I'm 26, 27 at this time. So, I'm an adult. So adults go to bars, they hang out with other adults and everyone in the school is really young. So I'm like, I'm not really hanging out. So I go out one day and I'm at this bar and I'm talking about who I am. And they're like, yo, you should meet my friend because he works at Capcom. I was like, yo, that's Capcom, Street Fighter. You ever heard that game? Ryu and Ken. Oh, okay. All right. That's okay. Legendary game company. If you think of Capcom, you think Nintendo, they're not neck and neck, but they came out at the same time. And he was like, yo, he works there. You should talk to him. And I was like, this is great. I come to find out that Capcom's Honten, their headquarters, is over in Osaka. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, this is great. Okay, I'm starting to find out the places where I might go. There's another game company called SNK. They make another fighting game, and I applied there. There's another one that is called Platinum Games, and I began to apply to these video game companies. And unfortunately, they were still like, this is when it was really stuck, because they were like, you don't have any Japanese work experience. So all the experience that I've had in my entire life in Japan, in America, of me being a data scientist, of me being a game developer, of me going to college and having these degrees, meant nothing. Meant so little in Japan. It was really hurtful to see that, because I was like, whoa, like,
It's disheartening.
what? Yes, it was, because I was like, I got a fat resume. Like, I'm not just some scrub. Like, I can speak your language, and I also know business. Like, I know these things. But they're like we have deemed that you don't have any experience in Japan, and therefore we're not going to hire you. And that was really hard. So then I started networking with more people. I ended up finding a video game recruiter. I was still in school. And so she was like, hey, like, all right, this is the game plan. This is everything that's going on. I'll see if I can find you a position. And she contacted me, and she was like, I found this company. It's over in Fukuoka, which is down south, south of Japan, Kyushu. And she's like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, beggars can't be choosers. Let's do this. And so, I go to the school office, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to like look for a job. And they're like, and by this point, they're like loving me, because they're like, man, like John is really like going hard. He's really trying. Because when I first got there, Japanese is horrible. They actually had a little bit of an offsite, and we all got to hang out with the teachers and stuff. And they like drink, and they drink with the students. I mean, the students don't, but they just get together, and they're like, well, I can drink with them because I'm older. And they're just getting really loose. And I'm like, John, that interview you gave was so bad. And I was like, oh, thanks, guys. They're like, it was so bad. And we were like, can this guy handle this? But you've come such a long way. Like, I was definitely most improved student at that university. And I don't care. I love that. So then I'm telling them like, hey, I need to, not come to school. I'm going to miss a class because I got to go to Fukuoka and do this job. They're like, you got to make it up, but okay. And so I go to take the bullet train, the Shinkansen, down to Fukuoka, down south. I go for this interview in this place I don't even know at all. I have the interview. I'm nervous because, again, everything's in Japanese. And by the way, they have a certain procedure you're supposed to do when you go into an interview in Japan. Because, again, all these kids do this thing called this job hunting. And so when you go to the door, you're supposed to knock on it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Now 4. Not like that. Like, I practice this, and they practice this. You knock on it 3 times. You open the door very nicely. You close it. You turn back around. You bow. You say your name. You walk to the chair. You say your name again. You sit down, and you wait for your question. Like, they have like there's a formation to this. And so like I'm doing this like in my black suit and everything like that, and I'm like nervous, and they're asking me these questions like, and like I'm like, yo, you're firing these questions back and forth. And I'm answering them. And then, I start to become my natural self. And I'm like, well, let me just describe you like on a whiteboard real quick. And I like get the whiteboard to like write stuff out. And so then I guess I passed. I don't know. I ended up having that exam. And then I ended up meeting with the CEO. He comes and he asked me more questions. And that was it. They're like, okay, we'll let you know. I was like, oh my God, that was so intense. And then, I stayed the night there. I come back the next day. And about 2 days later, I get like, the recruiter's like, yo, you passed the exam, you got the job. And I was like, what? Like, this is crazy. And so all my friends were so hyped because all in the same time, they were all getting their results back from their job hunting. And I was like, yo, I got my job hunting. And like, also we're graduating from this program. And for however it was, I was able to match everything so perfectly with my graduation. And as soon as I graduated, the next day I moved out of my apartment and I moved down and I started working in Japan, this video game.
What was your job title there?
There I was doing quality assurance QA, which is funny because if you ask anyone about when they want to go into video game development, they all say start in QA. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, it was just, which means you're doing bug testing. You're checking out the product, you're being sure that the game works. My Japanese visa, because you have to apply for a visa, mm-hmm. They have to classify you as something in order for you to be able, and that determines how long you're allowed to stay in the country. Mm-hmm. So my visa says that I'm qualified to be an engineer, a specialist in humanities and international services. What says on this bad boy right here.
Nice.
And so that's what I got. And I was like, okay, like, yeah, I can do all those things. Like, I like that. I like that if I go to a job, I'm like, these are the things I specialize in. Because, I mean, they're right to a certain degree. And I started off at this company, and it was just like, when I was at the advertising company, basically it was like in the mailroom, they were having me do some really remedial tasks. And over time, I ended up becoming the head of their, international marketing division, like at this company, because you can only keep me not doing something for so long before I just begin to do it myself. And so again, I began to just know everyone at the company, get my hands dirty, just say like, I've done this before, like, I can help you guys out. Like, oh, you're trying to find out analytics on your players? Well, do you use Uni Analytics? Do you have a database? Do you know SQL? Let me write you some queries. And like, they're like, how does this guy know how to do this? And I was like, I always know how to do this. People just don't look. I did some crazy things. I helped them win a competition, a pitch competition. And then we got to attend this event called SLUS, which is a huge business event that happens over in Finland. And they're like, well, we can't speak English, so John, you're going to go. And so all of a sudden I go to Finland because I was like, where did this come from? I'm in Finland now, and I went to Tokyo for business trips. And it was great to work for this small company because if I had worked for a big company, they would have kept me exactly where I am, because of being a traditional Japanese company. But by working for this small company in what is really known as like a startup valley of Japan, I was able to flourish and got a lot of opportunity that allowed me to rework my own video game studio.
Wow, that's amazing. And you were fluent in Japan by this point.
Oh yeah. Again, the JLPT, Japanese Language Proficiency Exam, I had N1 by the time I had graduated. So I came into this program not even having N4, this Japanese program. And I came out having N1 just to show you how much I leap levels. That was wild. I mean, I couldn't believe myself that I had known Japanese at this point. I mean, so just to give you my range, I can do anything from differential equations. I can translate differential equations to, one of my last days in Japan, I was meditating with Buddhist monks. So I went from like ancient Buddhist texts to differential equations. I can do any of that stuff.
Their math is probably written differently too, or is it just numbers?
No. I mean, math is universal language. So it's written, the functions are written there. It's just the descriptions after that where they're like, cause I'm like, all right, I think I understand what this says. And then they have a description, of it. Then I have to translate that. So I have to try to understand what the function is and then also understand how this person is describing it. And I think a lot of identity is like, I think it's funny because when you see someone write, when you read someone's writing, you kind of see a little bit of their character. And like, I can tell this person doesn't even know what they're talking about. Like when I'm reading this, I'm like, yo, this dude doesn't know. How am I supposed to be able to translate this when this person is making this long, passage about this function and they don't know? And
oh, wow. See, I thought math was written in kanji, like their like notation for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but.
Again, the functions themselves are going to be, just normal ones. When it comes to technical languages and technical companies in Japan, they end up leaning a lot more on conventional, because English, which has become, our universal language, really. A lot of katakana because they're using a lot of foreign words, like, site, like website. Site is saito, like you're not using some word like that's that. And when you're talking about function, there's not going to be a word for function in Japanese. It's going to be like function, or something like that. And so a lot of it wasn't that hard to conceptualize, even though you still had to understand what the function actually does.
After you graduated, you were working there. Talk us through that journey and how you got the idea for your startup.
Okay. So again, already had Urban Electronics, right? So it was already making video games. But what happened is that when I was working at this company, they made this pivot to blockchain games. And I was like, what the heck is this? I barely know what Bitcoin is. And the phenomenon that's going on right now in a very small niche that still no one really knows about is the ability to be able to use cryptocurrencies to purchase and trade in-game items. So again, whatever you do now doesn't only exist inside the game, things now exist outside the game. And they are your possession. You find a really rare sword in a game, you can now own that sword. The company I was working with decided to just switch over to this, and they made this game called Crypt Oink, which is these really, really cute pigs. They're adorable, and you can breed them, and you breed a yellow one, you bring a yellow one and a red one together, and you get an orange one. Like, there are all these permutations that happen. What happened was, again, I went to Finland to talk about this because, again, Finland's a huge video game capital. A lot of people don't know that. Angry Birds is a Finnish company. Clash of Clans is a Finnish company. So I went over there and began to talk about blockchain technology with them to understand a little bit more because they were on the up and up on it. It was really cool to see this nascent stage of this game coming out and seeing the money, again, the average revenue per daily active users, the KPIs behind it were so high because everyone wants to be able to make money, right? Now, then there comes a divide about people trying to make money versus play a game. And to be honest, one of the reasons why this game did not do as well as it could have is that they were a game studio. They knew how to make beautiful games. I mean, we owned the IP for Gudetama, which you might not know, but Sanrio, Hello Kitty. Mm-hmm. You've seen Hello Kitty. So this company was making games with in association with the same company that made Hello Kitty, basically. So they have mastered the whole kawaii, cute aspect, right? So they're making this really great game, but they didn't know how to make an economy based off of it because this stuff hasn't been done before. And so we had people who were enjoying our game, but they were like, you have too many of them. You don't know how to use them. I'm not making any money. And so they stopped playing. And so amongst all of these amazing conversations I was able to have at this point in my career with this company, was I was trying to tell them, like, you have to understand that people are after money. I mean, this might not be a Japanese mentality, which it really isn't. You guys are in it for the love of the game, but that's not what everyone thinks. Westerners we're hungry, koji and shugi, individualism. We want to make something, want to get something out of it. And I recommended these things to them, but they just very much were like, this isn't the direction we want to go. And it got really frustrating because the differences that we had were cultural differences. Even though I was completely on their side, but I was like, you have to understand what this is. And so I was beginning to come back to America after spending 4 years in Japan, 2 years at this company. Before I left, I had these relationships with companies over in Fukuoka and Tokyo and Osaka, and I didn't want to lose them. So I said, how can I help you even when I go back? And so they were like, you've done a lot. We trust you. And trust is a big thing there. When they trust you, they don't let you go. And so I was able to keep those relationships and do some international marketing for them. How can I help their games be localized for an American or a Western market? Where should they be marketing their games? Where should they be putting their games on certain websites? And I had 2 clients, and I still have those 2 clients, in which I would do that for them. Now, in addition, I asked the company I used to work for, I said, would you allow me to utilize these pigs? I mean, the conversation was much more honorable. Like, most honorable sirs, would you please humbly allow myself to humbly be able to lowly use your most honorable pigs? And they're like, you want to do that? And I was like, yes, because in my head, I'm like, you guys aren't listening to me. So I want to do this like in my own way. And they're like, okay, sure. And so they then allowed me to make this partnership where I could then utilize their characters in whatever way that I wanted to. And I thought that they have a 3D product. The games in the space called blockchain games, is still really new. They're all 2D, meaning, they're flat. Mm-hmm. They're not mobile. They're on their computer. I thought that I'd be able to make a mobile 3D game with their characters. So that made me think of augmented reality. Augmented reality games don't really exist. So I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take all these buzzwords, augmented reality, blockchain, and I'm going to make it happen.
What's the difference between augmented reality and virtual reality?
Virtual reality is a headset. So that's like me just like, yo, like, I don't know where I am, or I'm in this complete, there's a roller coaster. Oh, snap, here we go. And we're going down. Augmented reality is just projecting something that isn't actually in reality outward. So augmented reality has to be through an interface usually. So if you have glasses and you put these augmented reality glasses on, all of a sudden you see, Pokemon in front of you.
That is not a technology that I've seen common. Like, I've never hear about it. I always hear about virtual reality.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's because it's not as like as grandiose as virtual reality would be, right? Mm-hmm. But you've heard of Pokemon Go, or you have not heard of Pokemon Go? Okay, so that's the biggest augmented reality game that's really out there right now, and really the only one. And the thing is, like, you can go outside and all of a sudden the Pokemon shows up on your your phone. Again, it's augmented through a technological lens. Okay. That's the difference between the two. And so again, me focusing on mobile, since I always have, I was like, all right, let's do augmented reality. Now, augmented reality hasn't really been standardized too much yet, and it's really hard to do, which is cool because this first year of us making the game was all about us standardizing that. And if you play the pre-alpha we have, hopefully you think that it's smooth. And if it is, then that's exactly what we're looking for. But what's so crazy about this is that I am now able, because again, these pigs existed before I did this project. They're on the blockchain. You own them. You can buy them. There's a whole site of the thousands, roughly tens of thousands that you can buy. Mm-hmm. I can now bring those from the digital realm, from things that were born in cyberspace, and I can bring those into an augmented reality. So like anyone who has purchased a character in the past from this game who had bought or who had bred that orange pig that came from red and yellow pig can now, through my game, bring that in, and it can be their pet in this offline experience on your phone. And then that pig there is now like in front of your room on your desk. And what's so cool about that is like, and those things can go back and forth, and it goes from the augmented reality back up to the blockchain, and you can sell it to someone else, and then they can bring it into their game. And that is now a business model that I'm really looking forward to exploring, because the more fun things you have in your game for people to interact with, you can also make money from, because all of those items can be taken out of your game and sold to other people. And I'm really excited for that, because it makes clear sense to me. It wraps up everything that, like I said, that I've gone over with you thus far about me wanting to bring things from the digital realm into the realm of the concrete, rather they be still augmented reality, or if it is virtual currency becoming actual fiat, because again, you can sell them, you can make money. And also my ability to know video games and my interest in international relations from college. I still speak Japanese to these companies. I have to localize my video games in Japanese and in English, so it hits both markets. And it became the fact that I was able to really bring all these together in a way into this company that I now have is I'm really happy for. So Kaimon International is this international company that I started that ends up doing consulting and marketing for Japanese companies or for American companies that are trying to get in Japan. But I still keep that Urban Electronics, subsidiary under there, because that's my game arm. And Urban Electronics has been the one that is making this pet simulator, which we call Tontachi, which means pigs in Japanese.
So that your first business, that's the one making the AR game.
Yeah, this is a very hard point, because I'm working on my marketing, my branding right now, because I think I still want to go back to that childhood Urban Electronic game the Urban Electronics studio that I had when I was just a little kid. But Kaimon International represents this international, these ties that I've made. Again, one is more of the head company or holding company, and the other one is more of just the video game publishing arm.
Is this a registered business? When did Kaimon International come?
Yeah, September of 2019. So when I crash landed back in here into the States, that's when I registered the company, just hit the ground running, keeping my relations, and then also thinking about how I was going to do all this augmented reality. At the beginning of the year, Tech Town allowed me to join their incubator, and they helped my business formulate. Since then, I was able to take on another Japanese client from Tokyo who wants help with overseas marketing. Simultaneously, the video game itself grew. And I got to say that we're in a decent position. I'm nervous to see, I'm excited, but I'm nervous to see what happens in 2021. But I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy that I was able still to do it while being, in my hometown back here in Detroit to do all this. Still have my family around, but just being able to bring all those things back together is really cool. And I worked really hard in it, and it's still such a long way to go, but it's a decent place to be right now.
You have two businesses now, right?
Yes, I have two businesses right now. Yeah.
And so where do you hope to see these going in the future? Maybe let's say 10 years down the road.
So I would want Urban Electronic Games, to be a subsidiary of Kaimon International, to just focus on making games. I want to be able to make as many games as possible, as quickly as possible. And I don't even need to be the creative director on them. I don't really care about that. I want people to be able to have their teams and be able to express the ideas they want to. And I want these games to have an international influence. And again, Kaimon International takes care of that, because again, I'm having all these international connections. The people I have in Finland, the people I have in Japan, are helping the games I decide to publish. I'm assuming, hopefully in the future as well, that other people do ask me for help with bridging markets. Any expertise that I have amassed, I will give to other people in a consultancy way. And that's why Kaimon International is useful as its own independent entity with its different name. I would love to be able to have a video game studio here, and I'll just start with immediate goals. One here, and then one in Fukuoka, which is where I was. And if I can really develop games in both locations, that would allow me myself then to be able to have this international business type of life where I can go back and forth. I'd be really happy with that, because I'd be making games, but I would still be allowing games to do what they've done for me thus far, which is to see the world.
That's amazing that you were able to learn a completely new language, not even from the same continent, and then you were able to now open up a consultancy business and have clients in that part of the world.
I definitely think that I lived almost a complete life in my 4 years. I mean, just think about, mentally what I went through. And again, like I said, going from nothing, I think I went from being, a baby to really going into an old man. And when I came back to Japan, it did feel like something in me was kind of ending, but I'm still trying to keep it together for something cooler.
Do you have any tips for anyone wanting to get into the video game industry, out of college?
Networking. That's what it's all about. Know as much as you can, of course, obviously. I would say in this business, you have to be willing to network. And we're not even talking about just going out and seeing people, like, and going into offices, but leveraging it online as well. I mean, if you're not a person who's more, and if you're more introverted, then use the internet. Join your local IGDA chapter, International Game Developers Association. Find out the job postings they have there. Talk to people. Ask these people. You have to talk to people. That's the only way that I found. You will be able to apply for companies. I mean, they have open positions. You can do the conventional route, but simultaneously, you need to keep your network, hustle as hard as possible, and then you got to make projects so they can go on your resume. So even if they're not complete projects, get into the habit of making games. Take part in the Global Game Jam, which again is a 36-hour or 24 to 36-hour, 24 to 48-hour window in which you make a game. And I think that'll give you really good insight. So Global Game Jam, IGDA, and networking would be my big highlights and tips. I made so many connections actually since the pandemic, which is wild to think about. I was just last weekend, I was with a group of all Black game developers, and they're all West Coast, and I found all these amazing AR people. And I was invited to talk at a conference that was hosted out of Finland, but it was digitally here. I have actually grown my networking base, and I didn't even know that my skills could translate into a digital setting. But again, that goes back to the whole digital personality, actual personality thing. And it seems like they just go back and forth now.
Was there anything I missed? Any big highlights that I missed?
No, again, I still think it's just hard for me to describe to you of just the fact that Urban Electronics is my video game studio. Kaimon International is my holding company that does just international consultancy. So really the two are tied together.
Yeah. Okay. That was a really good episode. Thank you so much for joining.
I want to say thank you. I mean, I don't get a lot of chances to talk about my story, and I'm really glad that you found it interesting and compelling enough to want to interview me. I really love how you are doing all your stories about people who are in Detroit for the most part, and I think your initiative is really great, and I'm glad you found this interesting as well. So I really have to thank you a lot for
putting your voice out there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, really, it means a lot.
Thank you again, and have a good night.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, you too. All right, bye.
Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning into today's episode, and we'll see you next time.